do that. And I would like to go ahead and get started because I got a lot to cover and I only got 30 minutes to do it. And so I don't want to waste any time. I'm going to dive right in. My name is Amy Combs and I am the Assistant Director of Programs here at ECAC, the Exceptional Children's Assistance Center. And I put it in the chat box, get a little engagement going. I'm sitting here in Iredell County in Statesville. We got some folks from Wake, Alamance, Cabarrus, Franklin. I see some names I recognize. Hey, Allie. Hey, Christy. Okay, well, I am going to dive right in. Thank you for joining today's segment, Special Education Referral Process in North Carolina. This is something that we get a lot of inquiries about from the families that contact us. And this is also an area where there is a lot of wonky wonk, a lot of misinformation and misunderstanding around. So that is why I wanted to cover that today. Let me get my slide to advance. Okay, I wanted to start off real quick talking about child find. This is an obligation that North Carolina public schools are responsible for. And when we're talking about North Carolina public schools, we're talking about those traditional public schools, whether it's a county district, a city district, and also charter schools. Charter schools are public schools, and they are bound by the same policies that the traditional public school is held to, as well as the IDA, our federal special education law, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. And so schools have an obligation to have under child find where they are required to ensure that all children with disabilities ages 3 to 21 that reside in their district that are possibly suspected to be in need of special education and related services are identified, located, and evaluated. And this includes students that are homeless, students that are wards of the state, but also those students that are homeschooled or enrolled in private schools. And this is regardless of the severity of the disability. And so this is for students that are advancing grade to grade. It's not that the student has to be failing. It is for any student suspected of having a disability to make sure that they are identified, located, and evaluated. And so districts have to have methods in place so that they can locate and find these kiddos. And so this does not mean folks have to be going door to door, knocking door to door to say, hey, we want to know if there's any children here that might have a disability, but they should have things in place where they are in communication with perhaps the early intervention program in their area, local preschools, childcare centers, have things in place where they are posting, they've got posters and brochures that they should be making available in their buildings and amongst their staff. And so teachers, it's important that they are also aware of child find and their obligation to make sure that students are being identified, located, and evaluated. Okay, so this is the North Carolina policy on that initial referral. And so I'm going to run through this real quick and then talk about it. When a public agency, as defined at NC 1500-2.24, or a parent suspects that a child may be a child with a disability, he or she shall provide in writing the reason for the referral, and they want them to address, their specific presenting concerns, and maybe include the child's current strengths and needs. This referral should be given to the principal of the school or the child's teacher, or it can be another school professional, or the superintendent of the local, when you see LEA, that's local education agency. And then for those preschool children with disabilities, the referral can also be given to the person that is in charge of services, such as a lot of districts might have a designated preschool EC or exceptional children's coordinator. And so you can see here that the request should come in writing. However, there is another piece that I haven't gotten there yet, that I want to talk about. If it doesn't come in writing, there is a piece that talks about those families that perhaps make a verbal request, and I'm going to get to that. I just made a simple sample letter of what a referral might look like from a parent. And I used my own son's name. I dated it. I could send this to the principal at the school where my child might already be attending, or the school where my child is zoned for. I could send it to the EC director for that district. I could, if I knew the EC case manager in that school, I could send it there. Sometimes folks send the request to the guidance counselor. Guidance counselors are not typically part of the IEP team, so it wouldn't be my recommendation. That might be true for if you were looking for a 504 plan, but if you were really wanting to initiate having your child evaluated for special education services, I would lean towards the principal or somebody that is on the exceptional children staff. So I just wrote, I am writing regarding my son, Joey Combs, who is in the 2nd grade at Shepherd Elementary School. I have concerns about Joey's educational performance and am requesting that he be evaluated for special education services. Joey has a diagnosis of ADHD and is struggling with reading, organization, and completion of tasks. Thank you for your prompt attention to my request. Sincerely, Amy Combs. And so folks you have a lot of freedom. You can include as much as you want or as little as you want. It is helpful for folks to have some information if you have a child that is already maybe has a diagnosis, maybe has some outside evaluations. You can include as much of that as you want in that initial referral, but it is helpful for folks to have an idea of where are the concerns specifically. Once a parent makes that written request, that starts what is known as the 90-day timeline, and you'll hear me talk about that a lot. But once they send that referral in, they should be receiving an invitation to an IEP meeting. There is no specific timeline on how quick folks should be getting this invitation. I've seen in certain groups, it's like, oh, it's got to be within, you should hear back within 10 days. You should hear back within 2 weeks. There's no solid black and white timeline on how quickly you should be getting the invite. But certainly if 2 weeks has gone by and you hadn't heard anything about your request, definitely worth following up on. And I would encourage you to do so in writing. We always encourage folks to communicate in writing, do it by email. It kind of creates a paper trail, if you will. It makes for good record keeping and accountability. Nobody can say you said this or you didn't say that. It's right there in writing. And this is what the invitation to the IEP meeting would look like. All North Carolina public schools have to utilize a system called ECATS. And so the forms are pretty standard. Everybody should kind of be getting stuff that has the same information, the same fields. And on that invitation, it is going to give you an idea of the date and the time and the location they're proposing for that meeting, and also list the purpose. And so if it's somebody that made an initial referral, that first box should be checked to discuss the special education referral for an initial evaluation or reevaluation. And it should also include the other folks that are going to be present at that meeting. There are certain members that are required, an LEA representative. Again, LEA is local education agency representative, oftentimes a principal, sometimes a vice principal, but it really needs to be somebody that is knowledgeable about both special education, general education, and the district's resources. And so we want somebody in there that is knowledgeable of all those things, and also somebody that is able to supervise those folks that are going to be implementing the services. Should have a special education teacher, a general education teacher. There is, for those IEP meetings where there's going to be somebody going over evaluation results, that is when somebody is going to be required that is qualified to interpret those results. And so typically don't see this at that initial referral meeting. Folks aren't usually going over and interpreting results just yet, but certainly a psychologist could be there, a speech pathologist could be there, an occupational therapist, some of those specialists, but they're not always required. But they do, some of those folks have to be there when they're going to be going over results. They should be letting you know if there's somebody else that might be attending that meeting. And there's some folks they can't invite without your consent. And parents can also invite folks to the meeting. You can invite whoever you want. Obviously, it's going to make the most sense that you're inviting people that are knowledgeable about your child. And it is encouraged that you would let folks know who you're bringing. Sometimes folks want to bring a family member that maybe has a special education background. Sometimes folks want to bring, maybe they're working with a private therapist, an ABA therapist, or a private OT. You are allowed to bring those folks. But it is always a good idea to let them know we'll be there, but I'm also bringing so-and-so. They're going to propose a day and time. If that time does not work for you, you should respond and say, this day and time isn't good. It's ideal if you could maybe say, here's 3 options that would work. The team is obligated to meet with you at a mutually agreeable time. Parents are to have available to them the opportunity for meaningful participation in these meetings. And so in order to do that, things are going to have to be convenient and mutually agreed upon. And so sometimes that can be a huge task for parents and school staffs, trying to get all the right people available at the same time. But it can be done. And sometimes these meetings are happening virtually. Sometimes they're in person. Sometimes there's even a hybrid model. But we do encourage families, if there is a day and time that is proposed and doesn't work, please respond and let them know this doesn't work, but here's some ideas that do. It is ideal that you are getting that invitation not 24 hours before the meeting, although it happens. It really should be given to you so that you do have time to decide, or people work, or people have other responsibilities to make sure, like, I can swing this. And so if you get an invitation, they're like, we'd like to see you tomorrow morning at 8, you can say to them, I need more time to prepare for this meeting. And so that's not going to work for me. Even though we're not going to really get into the initial evaluation process today, I wanted to share some of the language that is in the North Carolina policies governing services for children with disabilities. Anytime you see these little numbers up here, the NC 1503-2.2, there is some additional language in here about that initial referral. And so you can see I bolded some important stuff. Upon an oral request for an initial evaluation from a parent, the LEA shall provide assistance as needed in completing a written referral. And what this means is if a parent goes to somebody at the school district and says, hey, I got some concerns about Joey, I would like for him to be evaluated. What we're seeing happening is sometimes that teacher, and maybe they have good intentions and well-meaning, or that person says, I don't really think he needs that. Or we'd like to try some other things first, or he's not going to qualify. I can tell you right now, those things should not be happening. What the response should be each and every time is, if you want your child to be evaluated for special education services, you need to make a written request. If you need help in doing so, I can help you. Unfortunately, some folks are kind of getting turned away or misinformed, that they have to, wait and see or do other things first. And that should not be happening. The conversation really should be, I need you to put that in writing. And if you need assistance with that, we can help you. Also, I highlighted down here, again, the timeline for the initial referral. There's a whole process, things that have to happen. And so you'll see here, the language is evaluations must be conducted, eligibility determined, and for an eligible child, the IEP must be developed and placement completed within 90 days of receipt of a written referral. So if a parent makes a written referral, or if a school makes a written referral, they got 90 days. That starts the 90-day clock. The clock does not stop. It is not 90 school days. It is not 90 business days. It is, doesn't factor in school breaks, summer breaks. The clock starts the day that written request was made. And, the feds have been clear on this. Timelines, you got to stick to them regardless of staff shortages. There is an obligation to adhere to your state's timeline. And what happens is for districts that don't, they've got to report back to the state on where they were out of compliance, indicators they didn't meet, and then the state has to in turn report that out to the feds. I recently was in an IEP meeting where the family made the written request on June 3rd. And the response from one of the EC administrators was, well, we're getting ready to go on break, so I'm going to date this in August. And then did not have that initial referral meeting until I think it was November 22nd. And when we brought it up in that meeting, we said, we need to talk about that referral date. That's not accurate. And they said, well, when is it supposed to be? And mom said early June, and they were like, oh, I don't know. And then I, boom, pasted the actual June 3rd email in the chat box. To my shock and horror, one of the EC administrators kind of threw up her hands and said, why does it even matter? And I was kind of appalled by that, because I was like, it matters a whole lot. Compliance is huge. And if you're already in the early stages, not adhering to policies and rules, it would make one wonder how the implementation of that IEP, if the child is found eligible, would be carried out. And now it is January 24th, and they still have not been invited back to go over those evaluations. So there's a huge compliance issue there. But 90 days, folks, that applies whether it's, again, any North Carolina public school, charter, traditional, they are bound by those 90 days. Here's what should be happening at that initial referral meeting. This is the form or the worksheet used by the IEP team at that meeting. And so if I know a family has a meeting coming up, I will usually send them this and say, take a look at this. This way you'll be familiar with all the areas that they're going to want to discuss. In all IEP, this one is, by the way, specific for school age children. It's a little different for preschool age children. I'm only going over the school age one today, but both of them will certainly highlight the student's strengths. For the school age, they're going to want to see, depending on what existing data or knowledge they have about the student, they're going to highlight any strengths that there may be in reading, math, written language, functional skills. This is important. Sometimes when people think about educational performance, they're only focusing on academics, whereas educational performance includes both academics and functional performance. And so we have some kids that do very, very well academically, but struggle greatly in the area of functional performance, especially with executive functioning skills, organization skills, study skills, things of that nature. And so it's important that folks are considering the whole picture, behavioral social skills, communication skills. And then there's going to be an opportunity to review any existing data that we might have on the student. And so if the student's already been in school, there might be some local and state assessment data. If they've already been in school, they're going to look at past and current grades. And this is important, but it's also important to remember that students that are advancing grade to grade, still, that doesn't, we don't just say, because I hear it all the time, we only evaluate students that are more than 2 grade levels behind. That's not a written policy. And again, we've got students that are twice exceptional, extremely bright, but can still maybe struggle in the area of reading. And so just because a kid has good grades, that is not going to be the sole determining factor. Nobody should be making any decisions based on one data source. They have to consider a variety of sources. Also, we'll discuss whether or not there's been any documentation of any scientific research-based interventions, especially those that are targeted towards academic, behavioral, or functional areas of need. This would be students that are perhaps, maybe you've heard the term MTSS, these students that are already receiving tier interventions. Many students are, and for some, that is working. That is what they need, and they may not be found eligible. And for some, they're spending way too long on these interventions. And folks are saying they're working, but we're really not seeing any real closing of the gap between them and their grade level peers. And certainly if folks are going to be going over interventions, make sure there's data to support it. oftentimes we just hear she's doing well, she's responding well. And it's like, that's great. Interventions require progress monitoring. We want to see it, show us, we want to see the evidence of that. Parents can bring outside evaluations, outside information to the table and present them to the IEP team. Sometimes this can be really, really helpful. The rule is that the team has to consider any outside information that the parent brings. And some teams are like, yes, give me all the things, this is helpful. Other teams are kind of like, this is nice, but we still are going to have to do some of our own stuff. But I encourage families, if there's stuff in there that's relevant, it's current, it's helpful, to bring it and share it. I think sometimes there's frustration when families bring an outside report and there's all these very specific recommendations. Schools sometimes are, they don't have to follow all the recommendations in there. They have to consider them, but it doesn't mean if you got a doctor that wrote a script for X, Y, and Z, or a specialist that says, Amy has to have this specific thing. It doesn't mean they have to do all those things, but they do have to consider them. And then any information directly from the parent in relation to the student's current performance. And so sometimes we see kiddos where homework is a nightmare, taking lots and lots and lots of time, lots of tears at time, like crying, and it can be a real stressor for the student and the family. That is also relevant for the team to know about. And so the referral form goes on. If there's any observational data, the teachers that might currently be working with the student, what do they have to share? And they'll also want to look at other information that may be relevant. And this does happen for a lot of kiddos, absences and tardies, kind of a thing, or those students that are highly mobile. It is something that the team does have to factor in when it comes to making a decision on eligibility or even to move forward. And then sometimes there might be existing information regarding vision and hearing. If they have that, they'll want to include that. And then again, if there was any existing evaluation and screening data, they're going to want to document that, what area was assessed, when, what were the findings. And then they'll move down to the reason for the referral or the areas of suspected need. And this is where the team can discuss, well, we do see some trouble with writing, or we do see some trouble with staying on task, kind of a thing. What will happen is, after all this information is discussed, the team's got to make a decision. And the decision options are as follows. I can move my little bar out of my way. The team could say there's not going to be any evaluation done on this student, and the referral to special education ends. Sometimes this happens. Folks get all the way through this and then the team says, no, we're not going to evaluate. They don't just get to say, no, we're not going to evaluate. They can say, no, we're not going to evaluate. And here's the reasons why. And sometimes those reasons are, I've seen this happen for some students that have missed a lot of school, because they can say, we're not sure that the child's performance is due to a disability, but rather could be due to the lack of instruction, the lack of opportunities to learn. So sometimes that might be a reason. Sometimes folks may say, we don't see any indication that this is going to be a student that requires specially designed instruction, but they're going to have to, have some data sources to say everything that we know about this kiddo right now is, pointing to that direction. And so they can say no, but they certainly do have to document why. And even if they say no, it doesn't mean that it's the end all. Parents have other options that they could explore, some dispute resolution options over the identification of their child as having a disability. Or they could check the next box and they could say, yep, we believe this child is eligible and we have all the information that we need to make this decision. This box is not as likely to be checked. That's so that I can remind myself to give you guys a survey. Not as likely to be checked because oftentimes schools don't have all the information. Even if they have all those outside reports, outside diagnosis, they have very specific worksheets that have very specific things that have to happen before they can determine eligibility. And like observations is often included in them. Some categories do have a requirement on those tiered interventions. And so almost always they're still going to need to do something else. And so that is when they would check the third box and say, we all agree we're going to conduct that initial evaluation because we can't determine eligibility based on the existing data. So we're going to need to collect some more. All right, let me get to my next page. Come on. Don't know why my cursor has gone wacky whack. I got to X out of something here. I have, here we go. Somehow I got on text instead of mouse. Here we go. Sorry about that. Okay, and so the end of this referral is if they do decide to evaluate, they then have to determine what are the suspected disability categories that we would evaluate under. And there are 14 different categories. And sometimes folks will pick one. Sometimes folks will pick multiple categories. Sometimes, especially if it's a kiddo, a younger kiddo under the age of 8, that maybe has already been diagnosed on the spectrum, you might see them say, well, we're going to look at autism and also developmental delay. It should be a team decision. And then they will go ahead and check all the evaluations and screenings that they will be doing based on what those categories require, and then also based on what the team determines. And then they will have to go ahead and list all of the participants at that meeting. They usually ask for signatures. Signatures on any IEP form do not mean that you agreed with everything and you loved it. It just means that you were present and participated in the process. And then the form goes on to state that you should be receiving a prior written notice to cover everything that was discussed, decisions that were made, why they were made, what was refused, what was rejected. You should also be receiving a copy of the parent rights, or we call these the procedural safeguards. I put the picture of the cover of that there. And again, you'll see here again, it says using the date of the receipt of the written special education referral, the 90-day calendar timeline begins. And so I've seen some folks where they made the written referral, say, September 1st, and they had the referral meeting October 1st, and folks are putting October 1st in as the referral date. Incorrect. It's going to go by when that written request was received. So talking about that 90-day timeline, these are all the things that have to happen in there. You can see the referral meeting. That's where folks start off. Not everybody gets past there. But if they do, then this is all the stuff afterwards that has to happen. The evaluation's got to be done. Folks got to come back to the table to determine eligibility. If the child's eligible, they got to develop the IEP. And in that development, they will determine the placement, where the student, the amount of time the student's going to spend among or away from their non-disabled peers. And again, I know I've said this many times, but you can see I'm really trying to hammer home 90 days receipt of the written referral. And these evaluations, they can take quite a bit of time. And so that's why we like to see folks being invited to the referral meeting pretty quick. So kind of like I said, if you made the written request and you hadn't heard anything back, it's been 2 weeks, go ahead and shoot that email, just following up on my request, wanted to see when I might be receiving my invitation to the meeting. Key takeaways that I want folks to have from this. Look at this meme I made. 90 days equals 90 days. There's no secret formula. There's no exclusions. It truly is 90 days equals 90 days from the written referral. It's this is where we see a lot of folks out of compliance and a lot of wonky wonk. Again, 90 days, not school days, not business days, not from when the first day of school starts, from the day that you the school received that written referral. That's when that clock starts ticking. Child fine, again, that applies to all North Carolina public schools. So charter schools are bound by child fine as well. If they have a child that is in their school and is struggling, there is an obligation for child fine to set in to where they might be the ones that have to go ahead and initiate that referral. Thinking about IEP team decisions, no one data source should ever be used in isolation. They got to really look at the big picture. For those students that are on tier interventions, the feds have been very, very clear on this, that the use of interventions cannot be used to deny or delay an evaluation. There are certain eligibility categories that do require that there are some interventions put in place and progress monitoring to be done. But that doesn't mean, I got a lot of folks saying we have to do this first before we can start the referral. Wrong, big fat no, not true. Those can be done in conjunction at the same time as the evaluation process is being done. And I see folks getting told this often, but you cannot do that to delay or deny the evaluation. And as always at ECAC, we like to remind folks that you are the expert on your child as a parent. And so when you have the opportunity to advocate for your child or come to the table and share information, just remember that everything that you're contributing is equally as relevant and important. And now I got two things I'm going to do. I'm going to launch a poll, and I know I'm probably running over. If you've hung out in tool time Tuesday before, you know that we got to do this. The feds do require us to report out on any of the presentations that we do to make sure that the information is useful, relevant, and a high quality. And now I'm going to go see what I'm missing in the chat. Teresa asks, can I bring more than one person? Yes, you can. I've been to some IEP meetings where folks have kind of had an entourage, and I get it, especially if you feel like you've been swindled or misled or, intimidated. Not always the most helpful. I think you can bring as many people as you'd like. Make sure it's the right people and knowledgeable people. And again, as a courtesy, letting folks know, they want to make sure they have enough room for everybody, and and kind of letting them know, I'm going to bring my sister. In my case, it's been already like 120 days. That unfortunately, we hear that all the time. And for those families that have gone over the 90-day timeline, you have a couple options. For one thing, you could file a state complaint where you can say, they're out of compliance. But certainly if that child is to be found eligible, that could be failure to provide that child with a free appropriate public education. Because if they found him eligible and said, yeah, we know the student needs this, and now we've gone 6 months without it, you may be entitled to compensatory services from the school to get some, not usually all, but some of the services your child missed. Too many times, twice exceptional or denied evaluations. Yes, we see that often, where folks, they assume that these students with high cognition, really good academic performers, can't possibly have an IEP. This is often true for students with dyslexia, and also for those students that maybe have significant behavior concerns because they're like, well, they're, acing the EOGs, they ace all their tests, but they may have other things that are really getting in the way and impacting their educational performance. Yes, you can request a copy of this. I am going to send out a follow-up email to all the attendees, and I can include the recording as well. What is the Vernell scale used for, please? I'm not familiar with that, so I'm not sure. So if somebody else in the chat knows, please do. Yeah, I can send you a copy of my slides. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks for the breakdown. Thank you. Good. We like thank yous. And I think I might have something in the Q&A. What is the difference between developmental delay and an intellectual disability? So for developmental delay, the child, it is only, that category is only available for children under the age of 8. And it's usually where they have a certain percentage of delays and it could be in speech or language, it could be in motor skills, it could be atypical development. And so sometimes we will see a lot of the kiddos in those younger ages fall under that category. But once they turn 8, then the team would have to consider another category. And so for my own son, my son has autism. He was diagnosed around age 3, had an IEP from the time he was 3 to 18. He was served under the developmental delay category. And as he turned 8, they said, you know, we got to consider another category. And he was not found eligible under autism. Instead, they chose specific learning disability in all the areas, reading, writing, and math, because that is what was having the biggest impact on him. And so nobody was able to undiagnose my kid, but they were able to say, this is the category that makes most sense. Intellectual disability, that can be a little trickier, because intellectual disability, you can have mild, moderate to severe. And so sometimes we will see that category used sometimes for students that maybe have more significant cognitive disabilities. But we could probably do a whole webinar on that. But if you have more questions about that, please call one of our parent educators. Is there a list of accommodations to refer to based on what the child needs? For example, if the child has issues with organizing notes, is there a reference site to refer to see what has helped kids based on this needs? Certainly, if you have a child with a specific disability, or a specific condition, you know, sometimes you can do a Google search to kind of say accommodations for dyslexia, accommodations for elementary school or with ADHD. It should never really be a one size fits all. Those things should be taken in consideration based on unique needs. But certainly we do have some vetted resources that understood.com or .org, I believe. They've got some really great ideas on different accommodations for different groups. Attitude magazine, they've got really great list of accommodations. And so those are things that our parent educators could clearly help you with. Okay, everybody's getting back to work. Me too. Sorry, I went a little bit over. Thank you for joining me, and be on the lookout for a follow-up email. Take care and have a great rest of your week. I'll stop sharing and I will end.